What we're going to move to now is a more detailed discussion of some of the challenges and opportunities that come up around the implementation of this kind of public-private active surveillance network and how it fits into some broader issues at the FDA. As Janet mentioned, its regulatory activities are above and beyond what's going on in this network. Some broader issues in the medical community around developing evidence and other steps. And we're going to start that with a brief discussion of infrastructure and governance issues. I've asked the speakers here, Janet Woodcock, who you all know and was introduced before, and Gary Neal, who's the corporate vice president of COSAT, the Corporate Office of Science and Technology, with J&J, or you're still...
Still with J&J.
Right, still with J&J. We had some other changes that we were talking about earlier. Make sure you don't get things wrong. You got to stay up to date here. What I've asked them to do is speak for just a few minutes, 4 or 5 minutes, on teeing up some of these particular issues in more detail. We're going to do governance and infrastructure first, and then to turn to a set of other issues, all of which I think resonated with the questions that we were starting to get and the comments we were starting to get earlier this morning. So hopefully we're going to build right onto that. Gary?
Okay, thanks very much, Mark. First of all, everybody got one of these when you came in. Janet has produced a really fantastic summary of these issues on governance, and I would encourage everybody to really take a very close look at that. Remarks I'd like to make, in general, when you're talking about issues of governance, it really boils down to who decides, who does the work, and who ends up paying for it. And so we are going to have to come to grips with this. None of it is particularly easy, and we're looking for, I think, a lot of input, or FDA will be looking for a lot of input from all stakeholders in how best to address those issues. Now, from an industry point of view, this is a really exciting time, and it's also a really great opportunity for all of us, I think, because I really feel that we are present at the birth of a true revolution in healthcare. And a lot of that has already been talked about this morning, but it's enabled by the convergence of technology, culture, and of course need, which precipitated a lot of this. And when we look at the power of the information technology, the emerging science, genomics, biomarkers, systems biology, all of that, and applying it to the challenges that we're now facing, it really underscores the need for us to try to address these issues by, one, focusing on training. Where are we going to get the people with the right training to be able to carry this out? So I think one of the governance issues that we need to address is creating a structure to engage with the health schools, the schools of public health, the medical schools, nursing schools, and wherever, to make sure that we have a real supply of well-trained epidemiologists and quantitative scientists who are going to be able to come in and really implement this. And they're really in very short supply. There's a number of things we can do. So I want to see that is emphasized. I hope that the very nature of this enterprise really must be predicated on science, on rigorous science and scientific principles. So we definitely need as has already been talked about, a strong, independent scientific board and committee to help oversee all of this. I also see it as an historic opportunity for us to really engage with many of the stakeholders. This has already been alluded to by Glenn and others, on what this means scientifically. This debate about drug safety and product safety, food safety even, has somehow been couched in terms that aren't really scientific. Maybe they're more religious or philosophical, but as some sort of titanic struggle between good and evil, rather than really a focus on science and what it means to use powerful contemporary products that have enormous capacity to help patients and have already enabled us to benefit many people's lives, to extend life in this country, but also have the capacity to harm some people and to create side effects. And we need to have that discussion around benefit and risk. So I think one of the elements of governance that we also need to address is communication and education. We need to do a much better job of that, and we are really in the spotlight here. I also hope that we could try to attract scientists from many adjacent disciplines, and whether that's sociology, economics, astrophysics, wherever, people that are really engaged in the study of data and trying to make sense of data. Because we again, are creating, in my view, a whole new science here. And we really need to get those, science has often been advanced by the intrusion of people from adjacent disciplines coming in and bringing their knowledge and insights into this. And so we really need to do that. And perhaps the creation of some sort of a committee or formal group that could encourage that would be useful as well. And those are a few thoughts that we had. We also want to remember that we need to involve FDA and industry scientists in there, because we have tremendous insights that we bring to the table, not only on safety surveillance, but in the long term, and this has been alluded to over and over again, the fact that this will, if we're doing this right, we can build a national treasure, if you like, of not only a repository of data, but a place where people can come to train, to learn, to work on these, and to develop and revolutionize the entire healthcare system, so we can bring products to the market that are more effective, that are safer, and that are less expensive. And some of the insights that we gain from that, looking at not associations, yes, that's important. Is there causality for a safety issue? Very important too. But what additional insights can we gain about what's happening in populations of people? Yeah. Not animal models and not just individual observations. Those have been very important in the history of medicine, pharmaceutical medicine, and all sorts of medicine, bringing those insights from the clinic back to the bench and then using that for new target discovery and finding new and better ways of doing things. We all have many examples of that in our own careers. So I think having those scientists engaged with this is really very important too. And we'll have to figure out how to do that, whether they're just involved in the protocols, helping looking at the tables, whether they're not really manipulating the data, but getting to some of those issues in a way that we don't exclude them, because there's much more here than just drug safety. I also feel that we need to do something to engender some culture changes among the physicians and healthcare providers. So some practical suggestions. The EMRs that have been talked about, the PHRs, they're not designed today with this purpose in mind. So what can we do to make them serve that purpose better? And what can we do to be able to train physicians if they would provide some input around causality to us? If we could end up in a system where we had an automatically generated MedWatch form, how much quicker could our progress be in this area? And so some of that is going to have to be engagement at that level with the provider community and with those that are actually creating these instruments that are going to provide input. So again, it's a great opportunity, and those are some of the thoughts I had.
Thank you, Gary. Janet?
All right, well, I'm going to be short. What I provided here was, it's really kind of a to-do list. Resolve these issues. And
No, this is standard operating procedure for Janet.
that's right. And I've already heard two more, which I think are very good. The conflict of interest, obviously, that is in our minds and has to go on the list. Also, I think we're going to hear in maybe the next panel about patients and making sure they have a very broad role and input in kind of the context of how the system operates, maybe some formal role. And so we'll hear more about that. And I think that's a very good suggestion. The reason I wrote this to-do list down is not that we've settled any of these. We haven't. It's to make sure we have a long enough to-do list that is inclusive enough that we don't forget any of the things that we're going to have to keep in mind. And so that's what I'm hoping this discussion will bring about. Obviously, the governance of this is very important. Everyone is going to have to trust that the governance will bring about, will be in the interests of the patients in the healthcare system. So I think the governance will have a large representation, in my mind, from those data owners, the people who are actually seeing patients, the people who are responsible for patients, and of course FDA and some others. But I think the role of the patient community and even the healthcare professional community has to be worked through more, and to what extent are they involved also in the governance, because they're very major stakeholders as well. But all the different issues, intellectual property, the communication policies, conflict of interest, all those obviously will have to be dealt with, as we said, very explicitly as we move forward. We just want to make sure that our list is very complete. We don't have any really glaring omissions.
Great, thank you, Janet. Questions and comments? Have people had a chance to digest Janet's list yet? Some good questions, some good topics on there. Yeah, in the back.
Jeffrey Hill, pardon me. Jeffrey Hill with American Medical Group Association, the Ansetta Data Warehouse. I think we all, and even in our data warehouse, where we're looking at ways to improve the process of care and understand better ways toward quality, we of course said, well, yes, and this could be used as part of a Sentinel network. Likewise, and appropriately so, putting together a Sentinel network, this infrastructure could be used for a lot of other things, looking at outcomes and performance, perhaps. One of the issues we deal with that I didn't quite see on the list here, and I apologize if I missed it, was what do you do with these data sets that are so tightly controlled when you do see an event that might be suspicious that then becomes validated, or extrapolating to the broader scope of value when you have outcomes data or quality data, or perhaps performance data that comes out of this on a certain segment of the industry, or a certain specialty of care, or a group of physicians, or perhaps even a specific physician practice. Is there then a sharing of those results, or perhaps a de-identified data set to those individuals so they can see the basis of those decisions or those analyses in the case of either a medical products company whose product is then at risk, or the practitioners of medicine, not just their patients, but the providers who are helping to generate that, some of whom may not be involved in all of that data that was generated. It might be scattered. So I think that might be something we need to be thinking about.
Yes, if you move under scope of activities on this list to the last bullet under scope, we talk about what the partnership should be involved in and what it might not be involved in. And these are not fixed in stone whatsoever. I agree, and none of this is fixed in stone, just giving my opinion here. The infrastructure that we build that will enable queries could be used for other queries outside of medical product performance, okay, which is what we're building it for, though. So if we build an infrastructure like this, it would be a waste to have other people build another infrastructure to do some similar queries for other stuff. However, I don't think this partnership, which would be with the FDA and those providers, should get or be responsible for managing the results of queries such as about quality. Are you following me? Okay. But it could be, under contract or whatever, the infrastructure could be shared, but then there'd have to be some other group that was doing that had the appropriate policies and everything. The infrastructure is neutral in a way. It's just an infrastructure, right? So I believe that quality or performance of, all these other things, they should be governed by some other governance structure than the Sentinel network. That's what I believe. However, they might share the same infrastructure. On the other hand, I think your point is we could incidentally discover things as we're doing our regular queries, because we're going to see disparities in outcomes amongst different groups that are reported back. And that's good. We have to put that on here because we have to deal with it once we find it. Now, one of the ways a network like this would add value, why would anyone join this network? Well, if they get results back, if they get feedback. Nobody wants to give poor care. All right. So if they're performing way below everyone else and we see it, then we would give it back. Now, as far as quality of the medical products that we're actually surveilling, those communication and data policies would be governed by the consortium. That would be open within the consortium, and the communication of that would be governed by the protocols that we've all been talking about developing. As Dr. Platt said, we need to avoid alarming the public every day or we'll have no credibility, okay? So it has to meet some type of credibility threshold before there would be a public communication. However, we certainly would look at those within the consortium. And I have one more thing. I'm sorry, this is long, but this is a very complicated question.
Good question.
But each member in our minds, okay, as we're thinking about this at the moment, each member group that has data that they're sharing into would be able to opt in or opt out of doing that. If they opt into participating, they're going to buy a little bit of risk for themselves as well as the benefit. In other words, they're going to find something out maybe about their healthcare system, and that would be governed by the data sharing policies that would be in place. So they would know that in advance.
And, a question here and over here. Or sorry, over here. Justin?
Does that make sense? It's complicated.
Gordy Schiff, now at Partners in Boston. We heard about Network 2.0, 1.0. Actually, I think Network 1.0 has a lesson that we should be thinking about, which is sort of pre the 1.0 we're talking about. Speaking of as a practicing physician, and the fact that I can't get the list of medicines that my patients are on. I'm just this question about what medicine someone's on, and that list exists. So somebody has it. The drug rep has it. IMS compiles this data, but I actually don't have it to practice better care in the office. Should tell us something about cart driving the horse and building on Janet's comment about where the data should come from and be owned and the sense of ownership. So to draw on that as an analogy and think about doing it right in this, as we move forward, this really has to be oriented around making it better and easier to practice good medicine,
Yes.
while at the same time giving the health research community a sense of what is really accurately what's on. I mean, I should be sitting there working with a list, refining it, working with the patient. At Cook County Hospital where I worked, we had access to the transactional database for our patients. They all got their medicines for free at our hospital, and we knew when their medicines were filled, what they were on. We could work with that. It's sort of an example of this public system being so far behind, we were ahead. So we just really have to think about that. And then I'll just add a related is, you asked about sort of we need more information about causality. We need causality about why people are being started on the medicines. So to get that indication, to get that diagnosis in there, not in a way that tells doctors you're just going to have to do one more thing whether you like it or not, but to really figure out how to integrate that into the workflow so it actually facilitate things for me. I have this vision of touch and voice, touch screens, and I mean, nobody has to tell people at the airport to use those touch screens, that you could wait in line and do it the other way, but somebody has just really thought of streamlining that into the workflow and integrating it, making it easier, and obviously the data probably is very accurate, what's captured at that point of service. So this has to be driven by the horse, not the cart here, in some fundamentally different ways.
Very good point, Janet. It builds on your comment about incentives for participation. I think
That's right.
even more front and center about goals for improving medical practice is a key motivating part.
And it's even more complicated because we don't have the over-the-counter drug use data either. And maybe PHRs ultimately help you get at that.
Right. Well, I don't think we shortened your list of topics, but as the discussion goes on, we'll see what we can add. I'd like to thank Gary and Janet for introducing these two topics. And we're going to move right along to some introductory comments on data and methods issues from Arnold Chan, who directs I3 Aperio, which tracks newly approved prescription drugs in real-world use as part of Ingenix and the United Group. Arnold provides medical insights with his medical background and oversees I3's research and the reports that are generated. He's a pharmacoepidemiologist who's studied drug, device, and vaccine safety using large databases like the ones we've been talking about today throughout his career. I also want to introduce Gigi Hirsch, the Executive Director of the Center for Biomedical Innovation at MIT, whose mission is to improve patient care worldwide by providing a safe haven, a place where academic experts, government, industry, all stakeholders can work together to develop new ideas that can be applied to some real-world healthcare challenges, and we certainly have our fair share of them to discuss this morning. So Arnold, please go ahead.
Thank you. All right, pleased to be here. And so this is a graph from the FDA report. So when we talk about data, well, I have to inevitably we have to say something about the bubbles and the circles. Marcus actually had a nicer graph, more color this morning. Sorry, it didn't show up very well. Just want to start with an example. So, just follow up with what Dr. Platt used this morning about, say, what kind of the Sentinel System 1.0. This is pre-1.0. This is a study funded by the FDA related to a risk management program surrounding a specific drug. So there was a drug that was not supposed to be used by some people, but then despite the FDA warning from the manufacturer, it didn't really change medical practice. So Dr. Platt and I were both involved in this study. So what I highlighted was the regulation or the black box warning came out in 1998, but the paper wasn't published until 2000. So we definitely could have done better if we have a much more efficient system to address the same question. So this is not a direct kind of a drug A causes harm question, but it has to do with drug A could potentially cause harm for a specific subgroup of patients. So if we have better system today, so what are we going to do? So I'm just going to touch on 3 points because I only have 5 minutes. So basically, this is the first one, kind of a philosophical one, raised several times before along with the discussion of the development of the Sentinel system, is that now you have exhausted the whole 150 million people who could potentially provide data for this type of activity. Then you lose the ability to validate the signal. So if we kind of think along the line of signal, kind of risk identification and then risk evaluation, then we'll be stuck. So what I propose here would be, so for example, going back to the circles, we use circle A and circle B for risk identification, and then circle C and circle D for risk analysis. And with apology to Marcus, I used the term database. I should have used the term data environment. Okay. Or, with the technology that we have, I think the better way would be to use 50% of all the data of one circle, and then to keep the other 50% for the potential risk evaluation. And the technology is definitely here. All right. My second point is, how to get data from disparate data sources. So the example that I shared with you, the paper was published in JAMA in 2000. We did the same thing, although we spent a lot of time doing this because I was part of the research team that extracted data from our system. And the data for that particular study came from several data sources. Several of us are in the same room today. So there could be several ways. It could be the same protocol, and then within each bubble, the knowledgeable data analyst within each bubble, develop the data. So that's one way. Another way is what Dr. Platt mentioned about with regard to the the vaccine safety data link, is that you have the same protocol, and then each of the data environment will build a similar or identical data structure, so that the same set of codes could guarantee that you will have a similar set of results, so that the discrepancy would not come from the discrepancy of the data, but it could be kind of a real signal that could be identified from multiple data sources. Now, as we move along with the concurrent development of the methodology, it could be done in a virtual manner rather than in a hard-coded, in a kind of a physical manner. So instead of putting the data, massage them into a physical database, the technology is here such that we can do it in a virtual manner. So some of these points have been pointed out this morning, so I'm not going to repeat that. Just going to kind of emphasize the last one because everyone said it, is the security. It's such that individuals and systems can control who can have access and who cannot have access. And there's an audit trail that this query came from the FDA, is approved by the FDA, and touch on the medical records of these 5,000 patients and only on these 5 data elements. So the technology is here such that there's such an audit trail that can be reviewed. These are as Gary said this morning, it's not just from the schools of public health, but actually some methodology development came from computer scientists. So I'm not going to name the name of this particular company, but this company is well known to be a powerhouse in computer technology. And some folks in San Jose, California, just developed this whole concept of a database such that individuals can have individual control over what data elements can be accessed. And the same can be applied to the data sources. So there are two levels. One is the individual. Say, Arnold Chan, I don't want my HIV status to be known to whoever. There's one level at an individual level. And at a higher level, United Healthcare would say, all these United Healthcare employees then should not be, the data cannot be accessed by whoever. So there can be at two levels, all right? And what I do know is that these technologies have been ported into the health world as well. So this is the last slide. So now that we know there are technology to get data from heterogeneous data sources, then the next step is how to combine them. The simple way will be to aggregate data at a table level and just combine the table, or have the identify individual level data to be combined. In practice, it could be done the first way. Say you have aggregate data from each circle and then be combined in a meta-analytic process. And the second then is to have a totally de-identified data set, combine them, and then do complex analysis. The real challenge that Dr. Platt mentioned this morning, you got to touch on, the real challenge is how to conduct very complex statistical analysis in a distributed manner. All right. So with that, I don't have an answer, so I have to stop.
I'm waiting for one. Okay, we'll let that slide. But Gigi.
Good morning. Thanks for including me in this discussion, Mark. CBI really appreciates it. I just want to start by saying a few words about what we see to be the priorities in this area of tools and methods, and many of these by this point in the morning are old hat to you. But we believe that we need to get to a point as quickly as we can to develop a set of best practices in this space. And that's going to involve rapidly doing pilot studies looking at existing methods, and in some cases we will most likely need to create some new methods. And then we need to, as quickly as possible, get to a shared understanding of when to use which methods alone or in combination with others. And that's going to depend to some extent upon what the question at hand is and what types of data are available to answer those questions. That's a lot of knowledge that we have to develop as quickly as possible. In order to do that, there is definitely a need for more research funding in this space. Fortunately, new funding sources are being established, which all of us are grateful to see. And in addition to that, because a lot of the questions are so cross-disciplinary in nature, it's very important to have forums where we can be doing collaborative research and having collaborative discussions across disciplines, and that's going to be a big theme of what I mentioned here today. That's why what Mark is doing here is so very important. These forums are rich opportunities for those discussions, and we do similar types of things at CBI in terms of our research approach. In the longer term, this issue of a talent pipeline is very, very important in this emerging field of safety science. And I'll pick up in a second on what Gary mentioned just a few minutes ago. And in addition, we also think it's very important to see the excitement of this, that as the new platform and new knowledge and capabilities will be established for safety surveillance, this is a wonderful opportunity to leverage our investment in these activities and try to figure out how we can harness those improvements to improve R&D and patient care as well. So this is indeed the beginning of a revolution of sorts. At CBI, as Mark said, we provide a safe haven for collaborative research across industry, academia, and government. This is our view. This is slightly different from what you've been seeing. This is our multi-petaled flower that we see as representing the landscape of safety system. And at CBI, we are focusing on the petals of the flower, which are highlighted in blue here. There is one particular theme that we are pursuing at MIT in this space as we try to figure out the best way that we can contribute to this important area. And that is that we are working with faculty who have knowledge and tools from other industries but have not yet worked in healthcare. And we are in the middle of a sort of real-time vetting and translational research process to see how these types of expertise from other industries might help. Specific example in the area of signal detection, for example, we are working with a faculty member from civil and environmental engineering who has developed a very interesting software system, which is, he calls it a 911 data trawler, which looks at trying to identify early signals of patterns across individual 911 phone calls that might allow you to identify at an early stage, for example, a terrorist attack. And we believe there might be some interesting transferability to the early detection of safety signals using this software system and his approach. Another faculty member that we're working with has done a lot of work in financial services and has used lots of different types of statistical methods from operations research, which we think may also benefit safety surveillance. In the area of risk management and benefit risk communication, we're working with a couple of faculty members from the aerospace industry. One has done very interesting work looking at risk modeling of complex systems, and another one has done work in the area of enterprise architecture, lean manufacturing, and systems transformation, which we believe could be applied either at the provider level across a single organization or a provider system, or potentially across the industry where there are multiple stakeholders looking at these safety issues. And finally, we just launched a new initiative that is a future scenario development initiative. And the thinking behind that, again, is that we're going to be very optimistic and say within the 10 to 15 years, a lot of you guys we are all going to get this figured out. And in 10 to 15 years, we're going to be in a very different place. And the world of drug safety is going to look very, very different. And we are taking this opportunity with some of our stakeholders to take a look at these strategic implications of what's happening in safety surveillance, try to understand how some of those may interface and converge with developments that are happening environmentally and in other technical areas to reshape the world of drug safety. And we will then use that to identify a near-term research agenda that we think might positively influence the way this world looks. And just a few words for a moment about a talent pipeline. Being at an academic institution, we think a lot about this sort of thing. And because we've been in an interesting role in this space within MIT, that is trying to recruit faculty and students to focus their attention on this, we think that perhaps there might be some leverageable lessons that we're learning from this process. I'll just throw a few of these out there and would love to dialogue more with folks after this. What we're finding is that when the faculty look at research opportunities, they have a way of looking at it and trying to decide which opportunities to pursue. In general, they're looking for multi-year funding opportunities. At the senior faculty level, there is an opportunity cost associated with switching from what they know well to a new space, even when they really, really want to do it. At the junior faculty level, we've had the experience of a tremendous junior faculty member who started to dive into this safety surveillance stuff with us, was very excited, and then his chairman told him that he needed to shift his focus to the world of energy, because there was a lot more funding available to pursue that. We also have heard from faculty that the level of complexity of these issues that we're looking at they're so challenging that you really need PhD level research to really generate the quality of knowledge that we're looking for here. Another issue to consider is that junior faculty who are looking for their tenure opportunities are going to want research problems that will draw very, very talented graduate students. And also, the cross-disciplinary nature of this type of research has its challenges and risks for academics. We have done a lot of cross-disciplinary educational pathways at MIT. We're kind of familiar with the life cycle of establishing a new cross-disciplinary educational pathway. And it's challenging for them because sometimes it enjoys a somewhat lower status than traditional academic pursuits. But nonetheless, we are finding a tremendous amount of excitement at MIT, and we're looking forward to doing what we can to contribute here. So, thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Those are our panelists. Now I'd like to open up some discussion around the data and methods issues that Arnold and Gigi have teed up. Again, any questions or comments, just raise hands right here.
Thank you very much, Songlin Su from Novartis. I'd like to follow up on Arnold's one of your slides. I think it is a good idea to not test the same signal coming from the same system or same data environment, whatever terminology. So you basically propose two scenarios, either A, B, C, D, or versus a 50-50 split. I think either way has pros and cons. But there are a couple of things actually need to be considered. Number one, when you talk about the communication or follow-up signals, when you split the data A, B, C, D, the signals may not be consistent in the first place because there's always a chance finding. And A shows signal, B shows no signal. What is the decision in terms of follow-up? In order to actually, if you do follow-up, use database D and C and D, the findings could be also different. One is positive, another is negative. So the question is, number one, is the communication at each stage. Do we need to have a consistent finding and a validation of the finding before communication or not? I think that question beyond the panel, maybe Dr. Jane Woodcock maybe also can comment. Second thing is the formulary. New drug coming to the market, different system, healthcare system have different penetrations. That also comes to play in terms of data selection for detection and for validation. Thank you. Thank you.
Arnold, do you?
Well, epidemiologists love controversy, so so we are very experienced dealing with results from different studies that did not disagree with each other. So I think that goes back to what Dr. Woodcock said. There need to be an independent advice kind of scientist, kind of without any conflict of interest, kind of evaluating these signals, according to very explicit predefined rules. So. I don't want to go into the details, so I agree with you in general that there need to be very explicit, defined rule to evaluate what is a signal and what is not.
Okay, thank you. I think we're seeing as these possibilities for larger and more complex data analysis open up that there is a real need, as Gigi mentioned in her comments too, for some major further developments and methodologically to deal with them. And I hope we've started that discussion of highlighting where that needs to go. There's another question up here, Bill.
Yeah, I'd just like to, I'm Bill Dumochel from Face Forward, Lincoln Safety Group. We'd like to really emphasize how much I agree with both the Gigi and Arnold, the idea of having to open up this pipeline for research and for getting new people in, and also the complexity of analyses. Some of the earlier charts seem to indicate, well, there would be all these different databases and then anyone could query the database. Well, the word query seems to indicate a kind of a simple thing, but in actual fact, a true new analysis might involve, setting up an entire software system platform inside the database, having possibly even a different database schema in order to make searches and certain analyses more possible, and that would seem to imply a kind of a close connection, an ability within each data structure to be more open to some kind of publicly accessible version of the data. Also, the ability to attract new researchers is often related to the openness of the data. There's a kind of a open source attitude that can produce an explosion of research if, in fact, it's easy for people to get access to the data, because without access to the data, a bunch of people with theories of new statistical methods, but without a way to check them and to modify them constantly is kind of almost an impossible and not going to be very productive.
So just to be clear, you're advocating for, as these processes get developed, that there is a set of mechanisms for transparency around the data and the methods that are being used for analysis.
Yeah, if it were possible even to supply a multi-gigabyte open source data test platform where more people could have access to try out different methods, as opposed to what I'm a little worried will happen is that each data source will kind of make one contract with one researcher and without the open access that would probably be most productive. because we just do not know the best way to analyze this data yet.
Any comments?
Well, this is more of a governance data access issue rather than the technical aspect. So I will leave that to the the whole system
turf
to
that
decide.
hard
Yeah,
question.
exactly. Just the bunt.
Process, right? Okay.
Yeah, great comments. Mark Dente with GE Healthcare. So part of the way we can address actually understanding the needs of data is to look for existing data standards, and let's make sure, part of the problem with our world is that we actually have too many standards. So it's one of data harmonization and looking at Office of the National Coordinator and CCHIT and maybe this organization and our efforts getting into those use cases so we start to understand age has already been worked out. So age, you can have interoperability and also drives down the technical need of setting up your own database and data schema. The other comment is just in support of Gigi. We've had great success of cross-domain seeding of folks coming in. So we've actually taken our own aerospace folks. We make jet engines. And we looked at low signal detection in a jet engine and to see how, if an aircraft actually has to land in real time. And we took those same statisticians and had them look for signal in our own clinical database. And it was a wonderful experience, new perspectives. So I just want to say, yes, we need to encourage people to come in and kind of push us around and challenge us. Thank you.
Thanks for the comments. One of the issues that has come up with the work of HITSP and AHIC and its future course is a lot of interest in trying to help the standards activities focus on not the standards themselves, but on specific applications that really can motivate getting to the practically relevant solutions on standards harmonization, and it seems like these kinds of efforts could be a big help with that. Did you all have any other comments? Right, well, I'd like to thank Arnold and Gigi again.
Janet wanted to say something.
Janet can say something, and then we'll thank Arnold and Janet.
Yeah, with regard to the governance and the topic about the test databases and everything, some of the pilots are actually directed at this. Okay, and so in a year or two, we'll have better information because we don't know whether we just want to totally do just distributed networks and so forth and have a lot of barriers to analysis. So once we're completed these pilots over the next several years, we'll have a much better idea about, because of course I think to have innovation, we're going to have to let researchers have access to some of these data sets and so on. We're going to have to figure out how to do that.
Yeah, that's right. Great. Well, thank you all very much. And next, we're going to hear from a couple of experts on legal and privacy issues. These have already come up repeatedly this morning, and you get to hear from some of the most experienced and thoughtful people on the topic. Kristen Rosati is a partner at Coppersmith, Gordon, Schirmer, and Brockelman. Her practice concentrates on clinical research, electronic records, health information, privacy and security, and consent issues. And she has done a lot of work in this area as part of the American Health Lawyers Association Health Information Technology Practice Group, a member of the National Governors Association State Alliance for eHealth, and a range of other initiatives on the legal issues related to the topics we've been discussing this morning. Judy Kramer is an associate professor of medicine in the Division of General Internal Medicine at the Duke Medical Center, where she is doing research activities, including being principal investigator of the Duke Center for Education and Research on Therapeutics, the CERT program there, which we've alluded to already today, focused on cardiovascular disease. And she continues as a co-investigator there and also collaborates closely with the HMO Research Network, CERT. She's a member of the FDA's Drug Safety and Risk Management Advisory Committee and was recently named the Executive Director of the Clinical Trials Transformation Initiative, which is another public-private partnership under FDA's Critical Path program. So Kristen and Judy, I'm not sure who's going first.
I'll go first.
Great.
Well, thank you very much, Mark, for the invitation to participate today. It's been a really exciting and interesting day. It's really fun to be involved, I think, for all of us in this very cutting-edge activity. You heard earlier from Janet Marchabrod about the eHealth initiative, Connecting Communities for Drug Safety Collaboration. And the collaborators wisely realized that it's not just technical issues that we're dealing with, obviously, in creating a drug safety surveillance network. But there's obviously legal issues and public communication issues and a lot of other issues as well. So the collaborators asked my firm to look at the legal issues for health information sources, health systems that have electronic health records, health information exchanges and RIOs that are developing across the country, and the pharmaceutical companies involved as partners in a drug safety program, and asked us to produce two major things that might be of assistance to all of you going forward. One is a legal guidance that evaluates all the major legal issues involved in using electronic health information on the clinical side for drug safety programs. And second, a series of agreements that hopefully will assist the partners in a drug safety collaboration with dealing with some of the contractual and legal issues. Now, moving to the guidance, my understanding is this is going to be posted on the Brookings website, so this is available for you. It's a very large document. I commend you to read the executive summary, and then if you're really a glutton for punishment, you can go further than that. But we examined a number of different issues. Privacy obviously floated right to the top as one of the most important issues that we all need to deal with in putting together drug safety surveillance networks. And Mark has asked me to focus my comments on that today, so we'll spend some time on that. But just to let you know what other issues are covered in the guidance, we also talked about common rule compliance in terms of all the research issues that you need to be dealing with, the FDA reporting obligations for drug manufacturers, which is a real key issue here in terms of determining the risk of pharmaceutical companies in participating in these types of networks. Obviously, the FDA Amendments Act of 2007 had a very large impact on this whole area. And then finally, we looked at tort liability issues under the common law for failure to warn. This is where the communications, the public communications issues that are going to be focused on are a real key player in terms of how we handle the legal risk involved for both pharmaceutical companies and the other participants in a drug safety network. Now, what our overall conclusion has been is that the legal risk is not high for health systems, health information exchanges, and pharmaceutical companies who are participating, as long as there is very rigorous attention to the privacy and security of the health information. That's really a no-brainer, very intuitive conclusion, I think. And it's nice to see that a lot of attention is being paid to this through talking about the use of a distributed data network. I think that's very key to the extent that's possible to get good information out of that. And then also the use of de-identified data when possible, or partially de-identified data when possible is a real key to privacy compliance management. Again, on privacy, I think this is just such a key issue for drug safety surveillance programs because there has been such public attention. A lot of pending legislation that addresses privacy issues. Just yesterday in US Today, you probably saw the article on personal health records and the public's privacy concerns with that. So clearly privacy is an issue that we need to pay close attention to. And I know from experience in the health information exchange world and the development of regional health information organizations across the country, which, by the way, have the potential to harness enormous amounts of good clinical data for use for public purposes such as drug safety surveillance. Health information exchanges and RIOs are really struggling across the country with the policy issue of whether to permit the use of the data that they hold or that they have access to for purposes beyond the treatment of the individual. Clearly, everyone realizes that there's very important public purposes such as drug safety and other types of research for harnessing this information, but it's difficult politically for HIEs and RIOs to make that conclusion. So I think the development of a national framework to guide that policy discussion for HIEs and RIOs is really key so that we can get to the point where we do have a national framework to support the delivery of healthcare as a discovery platform, as Dr. Eschenbach said earlier today. It's very key. Oops, I'm sorry, I went back. So on the privacy front, we looked at a huge variety of different federal and state privacy laws that any drug safety surveillance program will have to deal with. HIPAA is the obvious one. We also looked at the federal Part 2 regulations, which govern substance abuse treatment information, the Federal Privacy Act, the Medicare Conditions of Participation, and then we also looked at the issue of state confidentiality laws, which is going to be a real challenge, I think, for a national drug safety network to deal with because state laws are different. So what we did in our report, because we didn't have the resources to do a 50-state analysis, is looked at different categories of state laws that generally provide greater levels of confidentiality protection than the federal law, particularly genetic testing, mental health information, and HIV and communicable disease law, and provided kind of a framework for the analysis of these issues. Now, with all privacy issues, how that privacy evaluation comes out depends a great deal on the specific facts about how a drug safety program is put together. The HIPAA status of the collaborators, who has access to individually identifiable information, if at all, and what type of information is utilized will all be really key factors in determining privacy compliance for a drug safety network. Now, I wanted to share with you just a couple of conclusions that really floated to the top in our analysis of the privacy issues. The first conclusion is that the FDA will be really an essential partner in drug safety surveillance programs. That's obviously an intuitive conclusion, but when you look at particularly the HIPAA privacy laws and the state confidentiality statutes, involving the FDA closely as a collaborator in these programs will be a way through kind of the maze of privacy laws we deal with in two ways. One is HIPAA and many state laws permit the release of information about post-market drug safety issues to entities regulated by the FDA, and significantly also to entities acting under a grant of authority from the FDA. So one real option for privacy compliance to comply with HIPAA and the state confidentiality laws is to have FDA delegation of authority or partnership with an entity such as the nonprofit convener that's being talked about to govern the distributed data network for pharmacovigilance. Now, the second conclusion that we drew from our research is that a drug safety surveillance program structured as a research protocol or a series of research protocols will also comply with most of the federal and state privacy laws. Now, in order to make a drug safety surveillance program work as a research protocol, it will be necessary to ask an institutional review board to waive HIPAA authorization because of the large number of individual records that will be accessed to do these protocols. It won't be feasible economically to ask for the authorization from individuals. And most IRBs, because of those practical considerations, probably would agree to waive the HIPAA authorization as long as, again, there's really rigorous privacy protection in place. Now, this conclusion has a couple of potential barriers along with it. One is real regulatory uncertainty about the distinction between public health surveillance and research and human subject research, and Judy Kramer is going to be talking about that issue. And then the other real practical barrier to utilizing research protocols in a national network is the need to approach each data source for institutional review board approval. And what that does is introduces potentially a large variability in IRB approaches and decisions regarding the protocols, the privacy protections, and the other human subject protection issues surrounding that. One way that we can address the IRB variability issue is perhaps to create a multi-center or a central institutional review board at the national level to provide primary review for these protocols. And to provide local guidance to IRBs in the event that they want to do their local expedited review of the protocols as well. So while there are barriers to our way through this maze of privacy laws, they are barriers that we can overcome with a lot of coordinated effort at the national level. And I'll turn it over to Judy.
Thank you, Kristen.
Good afternoon. I would like to try to look at the implications of the regulations, the common law, the FDA regulations, and privacy regulations from the perspective of a physician researcher. Really asking the question, of whether we're really protecting patients in the end. In order to prepare my thoughts in advance, I had to make some assumptions about what was the scenario I was describing, so I had to look ahead to what might be said at this meeting. Hopefully I'm not too far off. I was thinking in terms of a range of goals for pharmacovigilance. The first, everyone agrees we need to be looking for these designated medical events that everyone talks about, the previously unidentified but rare and serious life-threatening events that we're concerned about no matter what the drug is on the market. But there's also a need, as everyone knows with the recent events in terms of Vioxx and other products, to detect an increased incidence even of common serious or life-threatening diseases like heart attacks. And these things may have different regulatory implications in terms of privacy and how we handle them. But the underlying purpose, as I see it, if we think about it, is to preserve the public health. This really is a public health mandate. So the model I was envisioning is pretty consistent with what people talked about today, a national system, Sentinel System, taking advantage of electronic claims and health records using distributed data. I was assuming the 100 million lives, so we're talking about large volumes that's required in the Amendments Act by 2012. And also a point that Rich brought up, which is that we really need to recognize that validation will require limited access to complete medical records by the covered entity, presumably. So the first question is this research? And I actually, even though I'm looking at this not as a lawyer, but as a researcher, after reading about this, it really appears that there are some conflicting interpretations. On the CDC, the Center for Disease Control website, there's a guidance that is very clear, and it seems very reasonable, that if your primary intent in what you're doing is to protect the public health, then it's not research. However, then I found a paper written by Ivor Pritchard, who's the, as I understand it, the acting director of the Office of Human Research Protections, which clearly contradicts that and states that the primary intent should not be used as a basis to distinguish research from non-research. So the first thing we need to do is get some rationalization of perspectives to help people in these endeavors. But Dr. Pritchard goes on to say, if the public health benefit of what you're doing is so compelling as to require participation, in other words, there are some things, if everyone doesn't participate, you won't get the right answer. If you're looking for the consequences of pregnancy exposure, somebody opting not to provide you the information completely undermines your ability to get the correct answer. And yet, the practical implications of making this all a requirement are significant, and I think would require quite a public discourse. Now, on top of there not being a consistent interpretation of what's research or public health, surveillance, even, and by the way, I did read the executive summary and then was compelled to read some more of of Kristen's document, and it's I recommend it highly, but they point out that many institutions have internal policies requiring IRB review of all research conducted at the institution, even if the research is not covered by either the Common Rule or FDA regulations, and even when the research is exempt. So best laid plans of mice and men could be brought down by conservative interpretations, and so this has to be a new paradigm of a social network where people are supported in different decisions. Other issues adding complexity Kristen mentioned, which is the confidentiality laws of multiple states. I do want to say one thing about FDA reporting obligations, because the document that Kristen mentioned does state that expedited reporting would be likely required if you uncovered individual events. And I would just like to say that if, in fact, that were required, it would really add tremendous administrative burden without additionally informing, because you're going to be getting aggregate data with a numerator and a denominator, and hopefully creating an environment where you also could apply hypothesis-driven research that has methodology to truly get at the base of what is going on. The last thing that I really must pull into this is the possibility of false signals. And we really must keep in mind the limitations of observational data. Researchers always think about this in terms of the big ones, confounding by indication, for example. And this is the kind of thing that requires that we do hypothesis-driven research, not just count numbers and think that we have the correct answer, because we are not protecting patients if we misinform in the end. I think we also need to rethink the way that in the past we've handled duty to warn through a learned intermediary. Because I think now that we're dealing in a different world of these large databases and the quantitative methods that are used, we know for a fact that physicians do not come out of medical school with any understanding of how to interpret these types of data. And in my view, that we might have to move to a concept of an interdisciplinary team with epidemiologists and statisticians and clinicians and FDA safety experts to actually have a discussion about what these signals mean and a plan prior to communicating directly to practitioners and patients. So after all my reading, first I'm going to summarize what I think are the likely requirements under existing regulations and interpretations, and Kristen's talked about some of them. I think there is probably going to be a need for IRB review of all pharmacovigilance programs, probably with expedited review, and hopefully with central IRBs, but you have the problem that not all IRBs will defer to a central IRB and not all organizations will agree to that. There will likely be waiver of consent for large observational studies for all the things that are already in the regulations in terms of minimal risk, impracticability, et cetera. And I doubt that that would adversely affect patients' rights and welfare. We believe that the public health exception in HIPAA for designated medical events would probably cover public health surveillance of those types of events. And for those things that require observational research, you would probably have a waiver of authorization. Again, the use of full medical records being required, I would think would be best handled by the covered entity being the one that actually does the medical record review. But I want to go beyond that. I want to say, all right, that's what we would require under the current regulations and interpretations of the regulations. So the question is, let's go beyond that and think about a new world. Those regulations and interpretations were developed before we used these methods. You know, that we're not just talking about disease reporting to CDC where the physician is sure that they've got a disease and then they just report it. We're talking about using an ICD-9 code that we're not sure of. So let's imagine a structure and a regulatory framework that actually recognizes the public health benefit of pharmacovigilance, where we have that discourse that someone talked about today with the public to explain, if you're so concerned about safety, realize that no drug when it's put on the market is safe. We know this. Let's not pretend that FDA approval means assurance of safety. Okay, then let's have a structure that recognizes the current state and the possible future states of health information technology as we look to new regulations. That we recognize the need for rapid hypothesis-driven studies to evaluate possible associations of serious events and a product. That we need rationalization of state and federal requirements for confidentiality in pharmacovigilance programs. And I think that the best mind should collaborate on how to facilitate pharmacovigilance and how to best communicate with patients and practitioners, whether it's under current regulations or whether we have to write new regulations. But a lot could be done to actually deal with just the interpretation and get support for a consistent interpretation that's always thinking about the patients and public health, not just protection of names. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Judy.
We have time for a few questions, so.
Hi. Sue West from RTI International. This is a very interesting panel because I think the legal ramifications of what we're doing are going to be kind of the devil's in the details, and that's where we're going to be held up. One of the things I'd like to point out, that's better, is that we don't want to be recreating the wheel. And I just returned to RTI from UNC. And when I got to RTI in January, I found out that RTI had a project that was like a $16 million project with ARC looking at privacy and security across all the states. And so what they've actually done is gone to all the states and found out about their privacy and security laws. And I understand that report is either in development or should be available now. So, you know, let's use the things that are out there that have been funded, especially by other government funders. The other thing that I'd like to point out, and this is something that we've grappled with years for claims analysis, we know that the drug data is actually fairly good because it's based on dispensing data. We're always worried about the diagnoses because of upcoding and those sorts of things. But I was at a health information technology meeting yesterday where somebody brought to my attention, our attention, that there could be issues related to use of electronic medical records, and that physicians, to protect themselves against medical malpractice, may be altering their electronic medical records when there may be certain problems. So I had always said, oh, the electronic medical record has to be correct because of practice reasons. Now we have to start thinking about whether the electronic medical record could have problems as well. So I think we just have to keep all of these things in mind as we move forward.
Just a real quick response to that. Most electronic medical record systems have safeguards built in so that when the information is changed, the original information is still retained. So there's, electronic medical records actually are much safer from the quality perspective than paper records.
Any other questions or comments section? Great. Well, thank you all very much for the presentation. I'd now like to introduce our last panel on communications and impact on practice, and we've got three very interesting perspectives here. Mark Booten is the president of the National Health Council. This is a membership organization representing many areas of healthcare from many different patient advocacy perspectives. Mark, throughout his career, has been involved in health advocacy, policy, and legislation. Before joining the council, he was the vice president of government relations at American Cancer Society for New England. He's also been a faculty member at Tufts. We're also going to hear from Sharon Levine, who is the associate executive medical director at the Permanente Medical Group of Northern California. She's a board-certified pediatrician and a nationally recognized expert, frequent speaker on issues of health policy and use of drugs and the design and effective delivery of healthcare services. She also serves on the board of the Reagan-Udall Foundation. And Lee Rucker, to my right, is a strategic policy advisor with AARP's Public Policy Institute. Her expertise centers on the appropriate use of medicines, on medicine communication to the general public, on utilization management, on benefit system design, and on a number of other issues related to ensuring value in pharmaceuticals. Do you all have a preferred order for speaking? Mark first, okay.
Well, let me thank you all for having us here and actually say we're going to do something totally different. You've been sitting here listening to a great set of presentations, and they've been very logical. That half of your brain, time to go to the other half of the brain, so you can give one half of your brain a rest for a few minutes. What I'd like to do is address this topic from the point of view of people with chronic conditions. And as we all know, we have unprecedented access to information. And our current decade is increasingly defined by public demand for transparency. We press our regulatory bodies for greater and greater access to information, often with little or no thought given to the implications on health outcomes of real people. Consider for a moment a child named Adam Todd who lives in Cedar Rapids. He's an 8-year-old boy with severe epilepsy, and he's endured up to 100 seizures each and every day. While epilepsy can be much less disabling for some people, for this child the condition was truly tragic, making it impossible for him to participate in even the most routine of daily activities: school, sports, play dates, social events. His life was at risk and his quality of life was absolutely terrible. His parents, working in close partnership with a team of doctors, trying more than a dozen medications, have finally found a drug that actually works for this child. Their son can now attend school regularly, he goes to birthday parties, he's actually on a basketball team, he has a normal life. But there's a catch. The medication that he takes has an FDA black box warning because of the serious effects it causes for some people. And as we all know, this kind of warning can have a major impact on physician prescribing, pharmacy availability, and certainly patient adherence to taking their medications. As we develop new models to better identify and understand post-market evidence, we need to truly consider the impact of the disclosure of this information on public health. Adverse event data delivered without context for bias or statistical significance is likely to cause many people to simply stop taking their medicines and suffer the debilitating effects of their chronic disease or disability. Our research at the National Health Council has shown that the manner in which patients assess benefit and risk is extremely complex. Decisions about medication generally involve both emotional and analytical factors, including their prior experience with the drug, the severity of their condition, symptoms, experience and trust of their doctors, and the credibility of information sources. We know the number one reason why people do not start or continue their prescribed medications is fear of adverse side effects. While we wholeheartedly support the creation of a national network for post-market drug safety, we want to ensure that any new evidence is communicated responsibly. Solving this challenge is complex, and we've had a lot of discussion about that today. But what is critical is the involvement with people with chronic conditions and their representatives. Collectively, we provide credibility and perhaps even more importantly, context to this issue. Far too often, adverse events are framed from the point of view of somebody without disease or disability, someone who has never relied upon a medication to improve or extend their life. Our involvement can persuade people to look through the eyes of a patient with a debilitating chronic condition, a patient who is willing to take a risk on an often risky medication for a shot at something equivalent to normalcy. We can provide balanced pressure from the transparency advocates who courageously seek broad disclosure without considering the unintended consequences of others. If you, your spouse, your mother, your brother, or your child stop taking their medication to treat their heart disease, diabetes, or cancer due to incomplete or inaccurate post-market information, we all lose. I think we need to ensure that Adam and the millions of other people suffering from chronic diseases receive information that they can understand and act upon to improve, not harm, their lives. So the suggestion I would make to this group is that when you look at this chart, and we had a great chart put up by Janet earlier, and we had a science committee to one side of the body, there ought to be a committee that has people with chronic conditions. Not to control the governance, although we certainly, along with all other stakeholders, ought to be at the table in the governance. But there needs to be a committee that can look at how we communicate the issues we're going to find. And it also needs to provide perspective on not only the safety and the need for the medications or issues we're looking at, but it also gives context to the previous discussion about privacy. So often privacy is framed from the point of view of simply having your information protected. And even people with chronic conditions want their information protected, and with good reason. But remember that the issue of privacy is always in the context of the circumstances. And if you're living with a chronic disease, as is over 100 million people in the United States, the context of that privacy is important. We want to ensure that our information is utilized for research purposes, not only to provide better medicines and treatments for us, but we want to ensure that there are better treatments for our children and for our family. And so one of the most motivating reasons why people are interested in electronic personal health records is because of the potential to use that data for research. So allow us to help frame the context of this issue, to give a lens through which people who may be perfectly healthy can truly understand the implications for these issues. So thank you.
Great, thank you, Mark.
Thanks, and can you hear me? Is this... Oh.
Lean it. Okay. That's right. Well, we will hear from everyone.
Good morning, Dr. McClellan. Thank you so much for including me today. I'm glad Mark Booten mentioned we're going to take a little different direction here for the next few minutes at least. I brought some art. I think we've certainly heard this morning that Toto, we're not in Kansas anymore. From the consumer perspective, if we think back to many, many decades ago, what the consumer might have experienced walking into their corner pharmacy where the chemist probably knew them by name and probably saw them regularly, maybe around town as well. And the time this painting was done, the physician's armamentarium was extremely limited, but they probably had a good feel for the information about the drugs that they indeed prescribed. We will excuse the fact that this actually is an Edward Hopper painting, and if you know Hopper, there probably was no communication going on between the parties involved, but we'll just pretend that there was. So let's fast forward. Does anybody know, this painting was done 80 years ago, okay, in the late 20s. Fast forward to today's system. This is just a schematic of our drug distribution model. Right, and I wish I had, earlier this week, Tom Rice, a health services researcher, presented on research pertaining to Medicare beneficiaries' choices pertaining to Medicare Part D plans, and I wish I had his schematic because this makes this one look very bare. So what indeed are consumers experiencing in today's world when it comes to drug information? And I suggest we have Jackson Pollock. But it's not just consumers who are experiencing Jackson Pollock. It's everyone. It's prescribers, it's pharmacists, it's the researchers, it's all of us struggling with the post-market evidence. So we have, as was mentioned earlier, we do have assumptions that as consumers we all go in with and that we very much trust our physicians, the prescribers, our pharmacists, and the FDA. We assume that our physicians will indeed know everything else that we're taking and that they'll talk to each other if we're seeing multiple prescribers. We assume that our pharmacists do know the OTCs that they just sold us last week and how that might interact with our newest prescription. And we do trust the FDA, and you know the signs were out there about the tomatoes, so, and we do hear about the medicines as well. But so those assumptions reign supreme in the consumer's mind. There is an oasis out there that may or may not be recognized, that the balance between risk-benefit is perpetual motion, like this lovely Calder sculpture at the National Gallery of Art. But that is something that's very challenging for consumers. And there's a wonderful opportunity through communication. I love this quote from Dr. von Eschenbach from several months ago. Our relationship with patients must be built on trust. That trust comes from communication and dialogue. It's not important what we say, it's what they hear. So how can we, with communication at mind, just a few quick ideas as to how we can move forward. I was glad to hear that Dr. Gordy Schiff mentioned a few minutes ago in a question that he's struggling with not having in his new home base good information about exactly what all the medicines that are being taken by his patients. At AARP and many other organizations in this room and the FDA, we all have our out there developed lovely medication record forms. And for example, I would love to see the medication record form in the Medicare New Handbook, in the Part D explanation of benefits, in when people are alerted to welcome, it's time for your welcome to Medicare physical. I'd love to see a rack of them in the pharmacy and in the physician's office. And I recently spoke to the Consumer Healthcare Products Association regulatory conference, and they asked for outside the box ideas, and I said, well, my idea is inside the box. I'd love to see a medication record form tucked inside the box. Another Another idea, there was a reference by Dr. Kramer just a minute ago about the need for better training in pharmacoepidemiology. I think there also needs to be a geriatric pharmacotherapy curriculum in the medical schools, in the nursing schools, in the pharmacy schools, as well as CE programs in geriatric pharmacotherapy for professionals already out in practice. And many of us in this room, I say us because we are a broad coalition in the consumer world, have been launching programs to promote medicine safety for consumers. Several years ago, in my former life with the National Council on Patient Information and Education, we had a great campaign when the OTC drug facts label came out. We did a public service announcement with Dr. McClellan and others, and the National Consumers League is here, and they have their SOS campaign. The National Council on Patient Information has something called MUST for Seniors, Medication Safety Training. So these programs are indeed out there, and I believe that it really takes a village, if you will, to borrow from one of our former presidential candidates, to help patients understand just even the basic level of safety. In this age of freely available information, drugs cannot easily be parsed into safe and unsafe categories. There will be shades of safety that must be graded against shades of efficacy. This was a quote from the New England Journal last July of '07. And I think that this concept is just very, very difficult for consumers to understand. And we really need to work all together to help consumers understand what part of that Jackson Pollock painting is most relevant for their situation at that particular time. Thank you.
Great, thank you. Sharon?
Thank you, and I'm humbled by your artwork. I guess my assignment from Mark was I had 5 minutes to reflect the concerns about communication and impact on practice of 600,000 physicians practicing in the U.S. today who have an obligation and a responsibility to understand issues around drug safety and to communicate that effectively to their patients. And I want to speak at first kind of in a global sense and then get into some of the specifics that I think are having today a significant impact on physician practice and some tremendous opportunities as we move forward, as we sit on the verge of transforming practice. As many people have said, this is about electronic health records. Is more than just digitizing paper records. It is about creating an opportunity to understand what actually happens and to transform not just the safety and quality of care, but also the way care is delivered to meet the needs of very different generations than for those of us who trained to practice medicine 30 years ago were led to believe our life was going to be about. And I think the first and I think most significant issue is one that Lee spoke about and Judy Kramer spoke about, which is that in fact there will always be uncertainty about the safety of any product that is regulated by the FDA. It will always remain. Our job is to get a lot better about limiting and constraining that uncertainty. And as Lee said, in the minds of the vast majority of consumers, and we've done focus groups with our members to understand this, safety means zero risk. And as Lee said, it's not, or Dr. Von Eschenbach said, it's not what we say, it's what people hear. And in the course of a clinical visit, trying to communicate what that means, that in fact, safety means acceptable risk given the likelihood of benefit for a patient or for a population of patients within the context of available alternatives. Now that's a 15-minute conversation, just for starters. We need much better and more effective ways, and I think this is a very fertile area for research, of communicating risk and also communicating uncertainty. It is one of the biggest challenges, I think, for clinicians involved in day-to-day practice is communicating the level of uncertainty that exists about any intervention, not just prescription drugs, and the likelihood of benefit. The second challenge is the incredible diversity of practice settings. I work in an organization, an integrated delivery system. I'm one of 6,100 physicians in a co-located practice with incredible support, a fully automated electronic medical record, and 60 years of longitudinal data on a defined population. I was stunned to hear Dr. Schiff say that in the most sophisticated clinical environment in the world, Boston, right? He doesn't know all the drugs his patients are taking, and that's in Boston. 70% of the care in this country is delivered in doctors' offices with 3 or fewer physicians. And the last estimate I saw of computerized physician order entry of ambulatory or outpatient prescriptions was that we're approaching 25%.
That sounds high.
That sounds high. I'm an optimist. So the diversity of settings, the size, the infrastructure, and level of support to enable physicians to translate in a meaningful way information they're getting. And certainly connected to that is the level of technology enablement of practices. Vast majority of physicians have electronic billing systems in place. Again, beyond that, in terms of electronic health records, it's quite sparse. And finally, the fourth issue, and I think a growing issue, is a need to enhance the signal-to-noise ratio that physicians get in terms of safety information. The significance of findings to their clinical practice. There isn't, first of all, as several people have said, physicians aren't trained in epidemiology. They're not trained to make independent judgments about that. At least they weren't. Medical school curriculum may be changing. We certainly, and so now I'm going to transition a bit to some critical priorities, I think, from the perspective of practicing clinicians for the FDA. As we stand on the verge, hopefully, of rapidly increasing use of computerized order entry systems, I think it's critical for the FDA to partner with the vendors who are producing databases that are populating these CPOE systems. We currently have a Tower of Babel. Different vendors use different risk standards, they use different drug-drug interaction methods, and it's not uncommon for a clinician who is using a computerized order entry system to see one level of risk assigned to a drug or a drug-drug interaction, and the pharmacist who's dispensing the drug sees another. So what the patient hears from the doctor in an ideal situation may differ a lot from what the pharmacist says when they get to the pharmacy. And so standardizing the format and a commitment from all vendors who are developing these drug databases would be enormously beneficial. And there are lots of opportunities for standardization, as we've heard all day today. Safety alerts, standardizing safety alerts to be, I'm sure this will create shivers down your spine, Janet, but complete, concise, and consistently formatted safety alerts so that clinicians, when they see a safety alert, they always know where to look for what information. It would be very helpful if there was the inclusion of severity, frequency, and clinical importance of the safety alert. And I will tell you that I've had the privilege of practicing in an organization where all this stuff gets formatted for us with a consistent template and an interpretation, in fact, of the significance of the alert for which physicians and applicable to which patients. It's an incredible luxury, and our docs have just gotten used to practicing in that environment, would be devastated without it. Another issue is the alphabet soup of categories of risk information and how they differ. Black box warnings, some great, some not terribly helpful. I think it's one of the chloroquine drugs has a black box warning that says complete familiarity with the complete content of the package insert is suggested. It's not, again, it's not terribly helpful. And this isn't a criticism, this is an opportunity for the future. We're all moving towards a common language. The difference between contraindications, side effects, and black box warnings, and what does that mean in clinical practice? And I think an opportunity to relook at the issue of push communication versus pull communication. Again, the noise of early communications, which I think have been done with all good intent around, we've heard some information, we're looking into it, creating noise when there in fact is a significant safety alert that is coming out and appearing on people's desktops, either in paper format or in electronic format. And whether there's an opportunity for an FDA website designed for busy clinicians that in fact could be a place people went to look for early communications, something that doesn't yet rise to the level of a push communication that says, clinician, take notice of this. And when should a push communication happen? And my own perspective is when it affects something you're going to do. It isn't about general information or background knowledge. It will change something or potentially change something if you pay attention to it, something you do in the office. I think I'm running out of time, but it may be worth considering, as Mark said, creating an advisory committee on communications, both for for citizen communication, but also for clinician communication, and how to make this stuff cheap and easy. Make it really easy to do the right thing, I think, is the goal of all of this. And I was going to talk about the risk maps, but I think I will stop there. Oh, actually, can I just take 1 minute? Just
have 1 more minute.
Sorry, okay, good. Thank you. And this is from the perspective of working in a system that is a data owner. As I said, we've got 60 years of longitudinal data that goes back on a population. We now are caring for 3rd and 4th generation Kaiser members in Northern California, and now a fully automated electronic health record. There are IRB issues in relationship to data queries. There are also institutional issues. And every research proposal we look at has both an IRB review, but also a review for institutional impact. And the notion of an open platform available to all researchers, I think, creates a whole slew of problems that could get in the way of this critical work on pharmacovigilance. And also, again, I think just representing the researchers who are connected with the Kaiser Permanente program, their great hopes and enthusiasm for participating in the Sentinel initiative, and their concerns that their access to research and participation in research not be precluded by the way this gets set up.
Great.
Thanks.
Thank you very much. We have time for a few questions. Any questions on some of the many topics that this panel has brought up? Yes.
I'm Sharif Elnahal. I just finished my first year of medical school, and I wanted to comment on one of the things that you said about developing clinical curriculums. I'm experiencing this firsthand, and I know for a fact that clinical epidemiology is being emphasized in medical curriculums across the country. And there's going to be a new generation of clinicians who are definitely adept at interpreting clinical data. And given this, I'm wondering what that indicates to you in terms of the ability to control the many levels of communication that are going to be involved, especially since we're going to have situations where you have unsubstantiated but the potential for type 2 statistical errors, and you have findings and signals that aren't yet substantiated by hypothesis-based research and whatnot. But you're going to have clinicians who are going to find out for themselves, who are going to be researching this themselves and going on the FDA website. And especially if they prescribe these new medications themselves on a routine basis, they're going to take the initiative to find out. So I'm wondering if you can comment on what you see as a developing capacity to control communications based on, given that there's going to be this new generation of physicians who are definitely adept at interpreting it on their own.
I would never suggest controlling communication. And we do have 600,000 physicians who haven't had, we have to deal with the population out there we've got. My issue is not preventing access either to consumers or physicians about information, But the issue of context that Mark spoke about is really important, and the issue of making it really clear the level of certainty that exists for those who can't and don't have the time, quite honestly, to go into the primary sources. The level of certainty exists and how potentially it should impact the way they think about clinical conditions. You know, and I think the Vioxx story was a great example. We've lived with drugs that create cardiac risk for decades in terms of chemotherapeutic agents. I think the outrage or the anger that resulted from the Vioxx story was that it was a trivial drug from a clinical perspective that created increased risk of a serious problem. So this issue of understand the risk of the drug and be confident that the benefit it potentially offers to an individual or a population is congruent with, meaning at least better than the potential for risk.
I'm Diana Zuckerman from the National Research Center for Women and Families. Wanted to congratulate you for this whole day, but I also wanted to emphasize what you just said. It's the context. When you're talking about safety, it's not just the benefits in the context of the risks, but also, as you said, Sharon, compared to other alternatives. And I think there hasn't been that much said about that. And when we're talking about research and looking at risks and benefits, those alternatives are really important, both in terms of the chronically ill patient who may have no alternatives, but also Vioxx is a perfect example of where patients have lots of alternatives, where at least many patients have lots of alternatives that are safer, and to make sure that when we're looking at the data, we look at that whole context.
Okay, thank you. Any further comments on?
I think that last point gets into the trust, and that consumers, even though we at our website and Consumers Union and other groups are trying to develop consumer-friendly comparative effectiveness information, I think that trust really starts with the physician, and we make the assumption that our physician understands the therapeutic options and the non-therapeutic options. But we as consumers do need to be a little more proactive about asking perhaps how they arrived at that, if we know enough if we're familiar with the other choices. But I think it gets back to the trust.
And I'm speaking from the physician perspective, trust is equally important, and I think one of the incredible potentially most powerful outcomes of the Sentinel initiative is that this will be information from a credible, independent, largely trusted agency. And, as Janet said, the management of, not just management, but avoidance of conflict of interest in the way this is set up will go a long way to making this the primary source of information that people look to understand what it is they should be doing.
I would add just to my plug of having some sort of committee structure where you have patients and consumers involved to, again, not interfere in the science or interfere in the governance, but to be there to provide credibility and context to the communication, because these issues are going to find their ways into the laps and conversations, breakfast tables of real people. And if it's not provided through the context of real people, we're going to have distrust in terms of the information. And I think that's a critical piece to really make this operationally successful in terms of public health. You look in this day and age where the only TV we watch is reality TV. The reality is people are looking for communications from other real people. They're on blogs. They're watching reality TV. We've got to provide that same context in terms of public health.
Okay.